The opulent main lounge of the yacht, the Serenity, was a symphony of shattered crystal and silent screams. Amidst the chaos, a man in a simple grease-stained maintenance uniform stood over the body of a heavily armed hitman. The fallen man, dressed in tactical black, groaned, his gloved fingers twitching just inches from the sleek military-grade rifle that had been knocked from his grasp. The mechanic, Liam Jackson, was a stark contrast to the carnage, his face a mask of cold focus. He pressed the unyielding steel of a heavy pipe wrench against the man's throat, the tool a brutal extension of his will. His voice, when he spoke, was a low and chilling whisper that cut through the air. You have two choices. You can lie there and bleed, or you can tell your friends to stand down. Your call. The man with the wrench wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was just a mechanic, a single dad trying to make ends meet. So how did he end up as the only thing standing between a team of ruthless killers and a billionaire's life? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Earlier that day, the world had been a different place. The Serenity was a floating palace, a slash of brilliant white against the impossible blue of the Monaco harbor. Below decks, in the pristine, almost sterile confines of the engine room, Liam Jackson moved with a quiet competence that bordered on reverence. The air hummed with the low, powerful thrum of two massive diesel engines, a sound that was as steady and reassuring as a heartbeat. Liam ran a hand over a polished brass fitting, his touch both gentle and diagnostic. He wasn't just cleaning, he was listening, feeling the vibrations of the ship through the soles of his worn work boots. His attention to detail was meticulous. He checked pressure gauges, his eyes scanning the needles with an expert's gaze, ensuring each one rested precisely where it should. He tightened a loose valve, the squeak of the metal, a tiny discordant note in the engine room's mechanical harmony, a note he quickly silenced. This was his sanctuary, a world of logic, pressure, and mechanics. It was a place where every problem had a solution, every component a purpose. The scent of clean oil and the faint tang of salt water was his perfume, a far cry from the expensive fragrances wafting across the sun decks above. Here, in the belly of the beast, Liam was in control, a master of his small, humming kingdom. He wiped a smear of grease from his tablet screen before tapping the call icon. A moment later, a bright, gap-toothed smile filled the display. "Daddy!" Maya's voice was pure sunshine, cutting through the deep rumble of the engines. She was 10, all pigtails and unrestrained energy, and she was the center of his universe. "Are you fixing the big boat?" Liam's stern features melted, his eyes crinkling into a warm smile that was reserved only for her. "That's right, sweet pea. Making sure she runs smooth." He could see her bedroom behind her, a chaotic explosion of pink and purple, a stuffed unicorn propped on her pillow. "Did you finish your project on the Amazon rainforest?" She nodded enthusiastically, launching into a detailed explanation of sloths and poisoned dart frogs that made him chuckle. The call was a lifeline, a vibrant, colorful thread connecting his gray and steel world to the one that truly mattered. "You promise you'll be back for the party, Daddy?" she asked, her voice suddenly small, her big brown eyes full of hope. "The one with the bouncy castle?" He leaned against a cool steel bulkhead, the warmth of her love a palpable force. "I promise, sweet pea. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I've just got to finish this job, and then I'm all yours. We'll eat so much cake we'll float right over that bouncy castle." Her giggle was the sweetest sound he had ever heard, and it echoed in his heart long after the call ended, a promise he intended to keep no matter what. Up on the sundeck, another world entirely was in motion. Alistair Vance, the yacht's owner and a man who measured his life in market shares and stock prices, paced the teak deck like a caged tiger. "No, you listen to me," he barked into his phone, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The deal is worth 9 figures. Make it happen or find a new career. I don't care how." He gestured dismissively at an assistant who hovered nearby with a tray of iced water, not even gracing the young man with a glance. To Vance, the crew were like the polished chrome fixtures or the automated sunshades, functional parts of the machine he owned, utterly interchangeable and barely noticed. His guests, a curated collection of investors with predatory smiles and socialites with surgically perfected faces, lounged around the infinity pool. Their conversation was a lazy murmur of wealth and privilege, a tapestry woven with threads of corporate takeovers, summer homes in the Hamptons, and the outrageous price of modern art. The blinding Mediterranean sun glinted off diamond bracelets and designer sunglasses. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, expensive sunscreen, and a general sense of untouchable superiority. They were gods on their floating Olympus, and the world below was a distant, irrelevant blur. A sleek black speedboat cut a clean line through the harbor's gentle swell, its approach too smooth and professional to draw any real attention. It bore the discreet logo of a high-end catering service, a familiar sight in a port that serviced the world's wealthiest. As it moored alongside the Serenity, several men in crisp gray uniforms began unloading insulated containers and crates of champagne. They moved with a crisp, synchronized efficiency, their movements economical and precise. A deckhand checked the manifest on a clipboard and waved them aboard with a casual nod. There was no reason for suspicion. This was the rhythm of life on a super yacht, a constant flow of services and supplies to feed the insatiable appetite of luxury. The men's faces were blank, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. They were polite, professional, and utterly invisible. They ascended the gangplank, their heavy-soled boots making soft, rhythmic thuds on the polished wood, each step bringing them closer to their true purpose. The last man to step aboard gave a curt nod to the deckhand, his smile thin and meaningless. The moment his feet touched the deck, the pretense evaporated. The shift was instantaneous, a brutal and jarring transition from service to savagery. The lead caterer, a man with a face like a granite slab, pulled a concealed firearm from beneath his uniform jacket, its integrated silencer making it look like a grotesque extension of his arm. In a single, fluid motion, he fired a single shot into the yacht's main communication array, the silenced putt barely audible over the pop of a champagne cork from the sun deck. A guest, turning at the sound, opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was choked off as another operative clamped a hand over her face, his other hand brandishing a pistol. The takeover was a masterclass in brutal efficiency. Within 60 seconds, the external communications were dead, the bridge was secured, and the crew on deck were neutralized with zip ties and cold, impersonal threats. The lead hitman, Silas, strode into the center of the sun deck, his weapon held in a low, ready position. His voice was calm, devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is a robbery. Cooperate, and you will enjoy the rest of your evening. Resist, and we will be forced to demonstrate the seriousness of our intentions. Now, everyone in the main lounge, move." Panic, sharp and acidic, finally pierced the bubble of privilege. The murmur of conversation turned to gasps and whimpers. The guests who moments before had commanded industries were now herded like frightened sheep, their faces pale with a terror they had only ever seen in movies. Deep in the ship's metallic heart, surrounded by the deafening, comforting roar of the engines, Liam Jackson felt a subtle, almost imperceptible shudder run through the deck plates. He paused, his head cocked, listening. It was nothing, he told himself, just the sea. He turned back to his work, blissfully unaware that the world above had just been plunged into a nightmare, and that he was the only one left to wake it up. The low, powerful roar of the engines was a constant, a living presence in Liam's world. It was the sound of stability, of immense power held in perfect check. But now, another sensation bled through the soles of his boots, a faint discordant tremor that had nothing to do with the rhythmic pulse of the machinery. It was followed by a change in the air itself, the subtle ambient noises from the decks above, the distant echo of music, The faint murmur of conversation that always filtered down to the lower levels had vanished. All of it. The silence that replaced them was not peaceful. It was a void, an unnatural vacuum that screamed of wrongness. His head snapped up, his senses, long dormant but never truly asleep, flaring to life. The oppressive heat of the engine room, a familiar comfort just moments before, now felt suffocating, charged with a sudden electric tension. His instincts, honed in the crucible of forgotten wars and clandestine operations, began to stir from their slumber. He didn't run. He didn't panic. His movements became a study in economy. He methodically placed his wrench back in its designated slot on the toolboard, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and secured the latches on a nearby toolkit. It was the practiced, automatic tidiness of a man preparing his space for action, clearing the board before the game begins. He moved towards a narrow service ladder, his steps now silent, his body hugging the shadows between the massive humming engine blocks. The mechanic was fading, and something older, something far more dangerous, was taking his place. He ascended into a service corridor, a tight gray artery running through the opulent body of the yacht. The air here was cool and smelled of dust and electrical wiring. It was a claustrophobic space, a world away from the sun-drenched luxury of the main lounge, yet it ran parallel to it, separated only by a thin wall and a decorative brass grate used for air circulation. Liam pressed himself flat against the wall, his breathing slow and controlled, a ghost in the ship's own machine. He peered through the grate. The scene below was one of frozen, surreal horror. The billionaire's guests, who had lounged with such casual arrogance, were now huddled together on the floor like frightened animals, their faces pale masks of disbelief and terror. 5 men, dressed in the same tactical black as the one from his flash forward, moved among them. They held their weapons with a professional's ease, their formation a standard diamond, covering all angles of the room. They were not common thugs. Liam's mind, a schematic of threat assessment, began its cold calculus. 5 hostiles on the main deck, standard tactical formation, ex-military, private security, too disciplined for common thugs. They control the primary access points, but they don't control the ship's guts. Not yet. His eyes settled on the leader, Silas, who was standing before defiant Alistair Vance. "Mr. Vance," Silas said, his voice a low, conversational menace, "you have something that belongs to my employer. A small data drive. You will give it to me, and this unfortunate interruption to your party will end." Vance, to his credit, did not cower. He drew himself up, his face a thundercloud of fury. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've made a very expensive mistake." Silas simply smiled, a chilling, predatory expression that promised pain. Liam's gaze swept the room again, cataloging every detail, every exit, every potential weapon, every terrified face. A part of him, the father, the man who had promised to be home for a birthday party, screamed at him to stay hidden. This wasn't his fight. His war was over. He had a daughter, Maya, whose bright, smiling face was a sacred trust he had sworn to protect. The safest thing to do was to find a secure hiding place, to wait for the authorities, to simply survive. He had made a promise to his wife on her deathbed, a promise to leave the violence behind, to give their daughter a normal, peaceful life. He could picture Maya's room, the explosion of pink and purple, the stuffed unicorn on her pillow. He could hear her laugh. To risk that, to risk her, for a billionaire he didn't know and a group of people he'd never met, was insane. He began to pull back from the grate, the decision to retreat solidifying into a cold, hard knot of self-preservation in his gut. But then his eyes caught a flicker of movement among the hostages. A woman was trying to shield a small child, a little girl no older than 7, who was crying silently, her small body trembling. The girl's wide, terrified eyes, so much like Maya's, met his through the grate for a fleeting, impossible second. And in that instant, the world shifted on its axis. The knot in his gut dissolved, replaced by a surge of cold, righteous fury. The mechanic vanished. The father trying to build a quiet life disappeared. The operative, the protector, the man who had once led a team of ghosts into the darkest corners of the world, took control. His mind became a tactical map of the serenity. Every vent, every crawl space, every junction box, every system he had so meticulously maintained transformed from a component of the ship into a potential weapon or an avenue of attack. He was no longer just a worker on the yacht, he was the ghost in its machine. He moved with renewed purpose, melting back into the labyrinthine service corridors. He didn't need a direct confrontation, not yet. His first move had to be a test, a distraction to gauge their reactions and create an opening. His intimate knowledge of the yacht's complex infrastructure was his greatest weapon. He followed a bundle of thick cables to a primary audio-visual junction box, its metal door humming faintly. His fingers, no longer just a mechanic's but a saboteur's, flew across the panel inside. He didn't break anything. He simply rerouted the primary output signal, creating a feedback loop of monumental proportions. The effect in the main lounge was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The state-of-the-art sound system, designed to play gentle classical music, erupted with a deafening blast of white noise, a sound like 1,000 waterfalls crashing down at once. The massive video screens that lined the walls, which had been displaying serene ocean vistas, flickered violently, displaying a blinding, strobing storm of digital static. It was a full sensory assault, a calculated burst of chaos designed to shatter their composure and force their hand. The hostages cried out, covering their ears. The hitmen flinched, their professional calm momentarily broken by the sheer unexpected violence of the noise. Liam, listening from the corridor, allowed himself a grim, thin smile. The test had begun. The response came quickly, crackling over the stolen frequency he was now monitoring in his head. "Alpha, this is Charlie," a voice barked, strained over the cacophony. "The entertainment system is bugging out, loud as hell." Silas's reply was clipped, laced with sharp annoyance. "Deal with it, and find the junction. I want no more surprises. Delta, go with him." It was the opening Liam had engineered, 2 of them, separating from the pack. He was already moving, anticipating their path, flowing through the narrow crew corridors like a phantom. He found the perfect spot, a dimly lit passage where a stack of linen carts created a natural choke point. He flattened himself into an alcove, becoming one with the shadows, his body a coiled spring of potential energy. The first hitman, Charlie, came around the corner, his weapon held at a low ready, his eyes scanning for the junction box, his partner, Delta, a few paces behind. Charlie was focused on the mission, on the technical problem. He never saw the shadow detach itself from the wall. Liam moved with a brutal balletic grace. One hand shot out, grabbing the barrel of the man's rifle and wrenching it downwards, using the man's own momentum against him. His other hand chopped down on the man's throat. A precise, disabling strike. The hitman choked, his eyes wide with shock, and Liam drove him back into the linen cart. The takedown was utterly silent, a whirlwind of controlled violence that lasted less than 3 seconds. Before the second man, Delta, could even process what was happening, Liam had Charlie on the floor, disarmed, and was cinching a heavy-duty zip tie around his wrists with a vicious tug. He relieved the unconscious man of his sidearm and his earpiece, the cold, hard feel of the pistol, a familiar, unwelcome weight in his hand. It was a weight he hadn't felt in years, a ghost of a life he had tried so desperately to bury. He crouched over the subdued form of the hitman, his own earpiece now feeding him the enemy's chatter. He could hear Delta calling for Charlie, his voice laced with confusion, then growing panic. He heard Silas demanding a report, his frustration mounting. Liam now had a direct line into their command structure, a critical intelligence advantage that shifted the balance of power. He was no longer blind, he was their shadow, their echo, listening to every command, every expression of frustration. He was inside their heads. The yacht, once their prison, was now his hunting ground. He looked down at the man at his feet, a professional killer reduced to a bound and helpless captive by a simple mechanic's tool and a ghost's expertise. A whisper, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, escaped Liam's lips, a promise of what was to come. "You should have stayed on the shore." He then slipped the captured earpiece into his own ear, the voices of the hunters now whispering their secrets to the hunted. The game had changed. The ghost was in the machine, and he was just getting started. The panicked voice of the hitman named Delta crackled through the earpiece now nestled in Liam's ear, a raw spike of adrenaline and fear that was music to his ears. "Alpha, Charlie is down. He's been neutralized. We have a hostile on board. Repeat, an unknown hostile." The man's frantic breathing was a stark contrast to the professional calm they had all projected just minutes earlier. In the main lounge, Silas heard the same transmission, and his face, which had been a mask of cold command, tightened. A vein pulsed in his temple. The game had just changed. His meticulously planned operation, a symphony of fear and control, now had a discordant note, a ghost in the machine that was actively fighting back. The silence that followed Delta's report was more damning than any scream. Charlie was gone from the board, and a new, unknown player had just made their first move. The wave of tension that rolled through the remaining hitmen was palpable, a subtle shift in their posture, a new alertness in their eyes. They were no longer just guards watching over sheep. They were hunters who had just realized something was hunting them. Silas's fury was a cold, compressed thing. He brought his fist up to his mouth, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl that carried over the comms with absolute authority. "All teams, lock down procedures, seal the decks. I want eyes on every access point. Bravo, hold the lounge. Foxtrot, sweep the upper deck. Echo, get to the engine room. Our ghost is likely one of the engineering crew. Find him and put him down." His orders were precise, logical. He was trying to shrink the playing field, to contain the threat within a defined space. He assumed, logically, that the saboteur had to be the ship's mechanic, the one man with the knowledge to cause such a specific electrical failure. His men moved with renewed, if slightly frayed, efficiency, their boots thudding on the decks as they sealed watertight doors and secured stairwells, turning the luxury yacht into a steel cage. They were attempting to trap the ghost, unaware that the ghost was not bound by their conventional corridors and staircases. They were sealing a cage, but the ghost was already outside of it, watching them scurry. Liam, listening to every word, was already a step ahead. He was moving through the yacht's true circulatory system, a cramped, dark network of ventilation shafts he knew better than the men who had built them. The metallic tang of the air was thick in his throat, the darkness absolute, save for the narrow beam of a small penlight he held between his teeth. He crawled through the tight space, the cool metal pressing against his back, the distant muffled sounds of the lockdown, the shouted commands and the slamming of doors, reaching him as faint echoes. To the men below, he was an unknown variable, a problem to be solved. To Liam, they were predictable, their tactical responses textbook as the formations they used. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator navigating its own territory. He emerged from a vent behind a large stainless steel refrigerator, dropping silently into the pristine, gleaming galley. The industrial kitchen was an island of sterile calm, untouched by the chaos one deck above. The air smelled of bleach and yeast. He was about to move when a faint, terrified whimper reached him from a walk in pantry. He drew the captured pistol, the weight of it still an alien presence in his hand, and moved towards the sound. He eased the heavy door open. Huddled inside, amidst oversized sacks of flour and rice, were two figures in white uniforms, the yacht's head chef and a young steward, their eyes wide with terror. The chef, a large man with a doughy face, held a trembling meat cleaver. Liam raised a hand, his expression calm, his voice a low whisper that demanded obedience but offered sanctuary. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." He looked at the cleaver. "Put that down. You'll only hurt yourself." The chef hesitated, then let the heavy blade clatter to the floor. Liam's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I'm taking care of this. Do you understand?" They both nodded, their fear momentarily eclipsed by the sheer authority radiating from the man in the simple maintenance uniform. He wasn't one of the attackers, but he was clearly not just a mechanic either. Liam closed the pantry door, leaving them in the relative safety of the dark. He then turned his attention to the galley itself. It was time to create his next diversion, something louder, something messier. He went to the industrial microwave, pried open a side panel with a butter knife, and expertly rewired the magnetron to overload its circuits. Then, he moved to a large waste bin filled with discarded packaging and oily rags. He used a simple kitchen lighter to ignite a corner of a cardboard box, creating a small, contained fire. It wasn't about burning the ship down, it was about triggering a specific response. Within seconds, the thick, acrid smoke billowed upwards, and the localized heat detector shrieked to life. A moment later, the sprinkler system in the galley activated with a series of sharp hisses, showering the entire section in a downpour of cold, recycled water. The fire alarm was a targeted scream in the sudden silence of the lockdown. A new voice, Foxtrot, came over the comms. "Alpha, we have a fire alarm in the galley. Sprinklers are active." Silas's reply was instant, his patience worn down to a razor's edge. "Foxtrot, deal with it, now." Liam was already in position, hidden behind the heavy swinging door of a walk-in freezer. He heard the approaching footsteps, hurried and heavy. The hitman, Foxtrot, entered the galley, his rifle raised, his eyes trying to pierce the smoke and the disorienting spray of the sprinklers. The polished steel floor, now slick with a treacherous film of water, was a trap of its own. Foxtrot took a tentative step, his boots slipping slightly. He was focused on the source of the smoke, the smoldering waste bin. He didn't see the freezer door. Liam kicked it open with all his strength. The heavy insulated door swung out like a battering ram, catching the hitman squarely in the chest and sending him stumbling backward. His feet went out from under him on the slick floor, and he landed hard, the air exploding from his lungs, his rifle skittering across the wet tiles. Before he could recover, Liam was on him, a knee pressed into his chest, the cold muzzle of the captured pistol pressed against his temple. The fight was over before it began. Another pair of zip ties, another weapon secured, another hitman neutralized. He now had two captives, trussed and silent in the chaos of the flooding kitchen. He was dismantling Silas's team one by one, using their own procedures and the ship's systems against them. Back in the main lounge, Silas listened to the silence from the galley. "Foxtrot, report," he commanded, his voice dangerously low. Nothing. The absence of a response was his answer. Two men, gone, vanished into the bowels of his own operation. The professional calm he had cultivated for years, finally, completely shattered. His perfect plan, so elegant in its conception, was unraveling thread by thread, torn apart by an invisible enemy. A primal fury, hot and unrestrained, surged through him. This was no longer a mission, it was an insult. He scanned the terrified faces of the hostages, his eyes landing on a young investor, a man barely out of his 20s who had been boasting about his first million just an hour before. Silas grabbed the young man by his designer shirt, hauling him to his feet. The investor yelped, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Silas shoved the barrel of his pistol against the man's temple, the cold metal a stark contrast to his flushed, sweating skin. He then raised his voice, not for the comms, but for the entire yacht to hear, a booming, desperate roar of rage aimed at the ghost who haunted him. "To our ghost who thinks this is a game," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the opulent lounge. "You have cost me 2 men. For the next man you interfere with, I will execute a guest." "It starts with this one." He cocked the hammer of his pistol, the sound a sharp, definitive click in the tense silence. "You have 60 seconds to show yourself." Alistair Vance, who had been watching with a mixture of fear and cold calculation, took a step forward. "Let the boy go," he said, his voice steady, trying to de-escalate the situation. "This is between you and me. There's no need for this." Silas just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "There is every need. Your ghost has 60 seconds. The ultimatum hung in the air, a direct challenge broadcast across the ship, a life hanging on a 60-second thread. Liam, listening from the drenched and chaotic galley, felt the immense weight of that threat settle upon his shoulders. His actions, his war in the shadows, now had direct life or death consequences for the very people he was trying to protect. The cat-and-mouse game had just become a hostage negotiation, and the clock was ticking. The 60 seconds dripped away like blood from a fresh wound. Each tick of an unseen clock was a hammer blow against the fragile silence in the main lounge. The young investor, held in Silas's iron grip, trembled uncontrollably. A low, guttural sound of pure terror caught in his throat. His face, once flushed with the arrogance of new money, was now a waxy, bloodless white. Liam, hidden in the drenched and darkened galley, felt every second as a physical weight. The ultimatum was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. It forced his hand, demanding he trade his anonymity for a single life, a choice that would expose him to the remaining, concentrated force of Silas's team. His mind raced, calculating angles, odds, and consequences. To show himself now would be tactical suicide, but to let an innocent die was a line he had sworn he would never cross again. The ghosts of past missions, of choices made in the heat of battle with consequences that lingered for years, whispered in his ear. Just as Silas's thumb began to tighten on the hammer of his pistol, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. "Wait." Alistair Vance stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture that was not one of surrender, but of negotiation. He had shed his earlier blustering defiance, replacing it with a cold, analytical focus. He was no longer a victim, he was a player at a high-stakes table. "Killing him gets you nothing," Vance said, his eyes locked on Silas. "The drive you want. It's in a biometric vault in my study. It's time-locked. Even I can't rush it. It requires my fingerprint, a retinal scan, and a code that changes every hour based on a satellite link. Take me to it, and you'll get what you want." Silas stared at him, his eyes narrowed, searching for the lie. The story was elaborate, technical, and filled with the kind of security overkill a paranoid billionaire would absolutely invest in. It rang true. "You are buying time," Silas hissed, though the barrel of his pistol lowered a fraction of an inch from the investor's temple. "It will not end well for you." Vance gave a humorless smile. "My friend, it's already not going well. But fine. Let's go see this vault." Silas shoved the terrified young man back into the huddle of hostages and gestured with his weapon towards the grand staircase. "Move, Bravo. You're with me. Echo, get to the engine room and confirm our ghost isn't hiding in the bilge." As Silas marched Vance towards the study, the billionaire's mind was working furiously. He was no fool. He knew this ghost was the reason he was still alive. The diversion with the audio, visual system, the fire in the galley, it was too precise, too clever for a panicked crewman. As they passed the corridor leading to the galley, he saw him, the second captured hitman, Foxtrot, bound and gagged behind a stack of catering supplies. But it was the bindings that made Vance's breath catch in his throat. They weren't simple loops. The man's hands were secured with a heavy-duty zip tie, but the excess length had been tied off with a complex, brutally efficient knot. It was a constrictor knot, cinched with a double figure, 8-stopper. Vance recognized it instantly. Years ago, on a sailing trip with a retired admiral, The old man had spent an afternoon teaching him the finer points of naval knot work, calling this specific combination the unbreakable man catcher. It was not the work of a deckhand or a mechanic. It was the signature of a highly trained professional, someone versed in the practical, often brutal, arts of the sea. His suspicion about the quiet maintenance worker, the man who knew the ship's systems so intimately, began to solidify into a staggering, unbelievable theory. The hitman designated Echo descended into the belly of the ship, the oppressive heat of the engine room wrapping around him like a wet blanket. The main engines were silent now, but the secondary generator hummed, powering the emergency lights. The space felt different, emptier, yet more menacing. He found the main engineering console, his eyes scanning the rows of digital gauges. Everything seemed normal at first, but then he saw it. The pressure readings for the secondary generator's coolant system were fluctuating, subtly but erratically. It looked like it had been tampered with, a delicate sabotage designed not to destroy, but to destabilize. "Alpha, this is Echo," he reported into his comms, his voice tight. "The engine room is clear, but something's not right with the secondary generator readings. It looks like it's been tampered with." Wait. A new alarm, a high-pitched shriek, suddenly split the air. A red light began to flash on a panel marked Fire Suppression Aft Compartment. Before he could even process the warning, a loud hiss erupted from vents in the sealed compartment adjacent to the main engine room. "Fire alarm! CO2 release! I have to get out of here!" he yelled, scrambling for the ladder. He knew the CO2 system was designed to displace all the oxygen in a sealed area to starve a fire. If there was a leak, the entire lower deck could become a death trap in minutes. He didn't wait for orders, he fled, sealing the watertight hatch behind him, effectively abandoning the entire lower section of the yacht. Liam, watching from a service crawl space above, allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had just cut the ship in half, denying the enemy access to its heart without firing a single shot. He was on the move again, flowing through the ship's hidden pathways, his destination the deck that housed Vance's private study. He needed to know what Silas was planning, what the true objective was. As he navigated a service passage that ran behind the study's mahogany-paneled walls, he heard the low murmur of a voice. It wasn't Silas or Vance. It was fainter, distorted, coming from a satellite phone. Liam pressed his ear to a ventilation slit, the cold metal a conduit for the deadly information being exchanged. Silas was speaking in low tones, but the voice on the other end was tinny and robotic. "Get the drive," the distorted voice commanded, a voice that oozed corporate ruthlessness. "And then finish the job. The board has invoked the mortality clause in his contract. His passing ensures a seamless transition of power. No witnesses, especially not Vance." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. It was an assassination. They wanted the technology, but they also wanted Vance dead to ensure a total market takeover. The data drive, Liam now realized, likely contained research on a revolutionary battery technology Vance's company had been developing, a technology worth billions, enough to kill for. The stakes had just been raised from survival to preventing a cold-blooded murder. Liam knew he had to warn Vance. He had to establish a line of communication to turn this from a one-man war into a two-man alliance. He slipped away from the study, his mind racing. He found Vance's personal steward, a quiet, loyal man named Marcus, whom Liam had shared coffee with on several early mornings, hiding in a linen closet, his face buried in a stack of Egyptian cotton towels. The man looked up, his eyes wide with terror. Liam raised a hand, his voice low and steady. "Marcus, it's me, Liam. I need your help." He pulled a small, heavy object from his pocket. It was a single, unique bolt, its head stamped with the manufacturer's insignia. It was a primary coolant pump bolt for the yacht's specific M-class engine model. It was unremarkable to most, but to the man who owned the engine, the man who had likely signed off on the multi-million-dollar purchase order, It was a symbol of the ship's very heart. "Get this to Mr. Vance," Liam whispered, pressing the heavy bolt into the steward's trembling hand. "Make sure no one sees you. Just put it in his hand. The fate of everyone on this boat depends on it." Marcus stared at the bolt, then at Liam's face, seeing not a simple mechanic, but a man of immense focused intensity. He nodded, a flicker of resolve hardening his features. In the study, Vance was putting on the performance of his life. He moved with deliberate, agonizing slowness, explaining the vault's complex security protocols to a visibly impatient Silas. He entered a code, then paused, feigning confusion. "It's the pressure change," he lied smoothly. "The barometric sensors in the lock are sensitive. I need to recalibrate." He was a master of the corporate filibuster, and he was using every ounce of his skill to stretch each second into a minute. Just then, the door opened. The hitman, Bravo, tensed, but it was only the steward, Marcus, carrying a silver tray with a single glass of water. "Mr. Vance, sir, I thought you might be thirsty." His voice trembled, but he held his ground. Silas waved him in dismissively. As Marcus placed the glass on the desk, his hand brushed against Vance's. The cold, heavy weight of the engine bolt passed from one man to the other, a secret exchanged in plain sight. Vance's fingers closed around it, his expression unreadable, a perfect poker face. But inside, his mind exploded with understanding. He felt the specific heft of it, the familiar shape of the head. The M-class engine's primary coolant pump. There are only 4 of these on the entire ship. This isn't just a crewman. This is the man who knows every bolt, every wire. This is the Ghost. The message was clear. The Ghost was not just a saboteur. He was the ship's master, its protector, and he was offering an alliance. Vance closed his hand around the bolt, its warmth a solid piece of reality in the chaos, a promise of a fight to come. He now had a partner, and the game was about to change once more. The heavy, cold weight of the engine bolt was an anchor of reality in Alistair Vance's palm. It was a message, a piece of the ship's very soul, and it spoke a language of mechanical truth that cut through the lies and terror. The Ghost was real. He knew the ship, and he was offering a partnership. The time for passive resistance was over. Vance's mind, a finely tuned instrument of corporate warfare, shifted gears. He needed to create a breach in the enemy's focus, a moment of chaos that his unseen ally could exploit. His eyes scanned the opulent prison of his study and landed on a massive antique globe resting on a heavy brass stand near the wall. It was a relic from a different era, a symbol of a world he once believed he could conquer. Now, it would be his weapon. With a calculated, almost theatrical stumble, Vance lurched sideways, his arm flailing out as if to catch his balance. "My leg," he grunted, his face a mask of sudden pain. Cramping up. His hand connected with the globe, not with a gentle nudge, but with a powerful, decisive shove. The heavy sphere, depicting continents in faded pastel colors, toppled from its axis. It seemed to hang in the air for a heart, stopping second before it crashed to the polished hardwood floor with an explosive sound, a deafening crack of splintering wood and shattering plaster. The noise was catastrophic, a gunshot in a library. Both Silas and his subordinate Bravo flinched violently, their weapons instinctively swiveling towards the source of the sudden violent noise. Their attention, for one critical second, was completely diverted. That was all the time Vance needed. In that brief window of distraction, he lunged for his desk, not for a weapon, but for a small, unassuming panel on its side. It was an old, hard-wired intercom system, a relic from before the yacht's last major refit, with a direct, unmonitored line to the engine room, a system so antiquated it wasn't even on the ship's main schematics. His finger jabbed the button labeled Engine Control. He kept his back to the hitmen, his body shielding the panel from their view. His voice was a low, urgent whisper, a ghost speaking to a ghost. "Engine room, I have their attention. I'm going to create a medical diversion. When I do, cut the lights, all of them. Then meet me at the grand staircase. We're taking back my ship." Deep in the ship's metallic heart, Liam was waiting. He had anticipated this, had traced the old wiring himself during his initial maintenance sweep of the vessel. He stood before the corresponding panel, a tarnished brass plate that looked like a museum piece amidst the modern digital displays. He pressed the talk button, his reply as concise and certain as a surgeon's command. "Understood. On your signal." The connection was cut. The alliance was forged. A desperate two-man plan was now in motion, a silent promise exchanged across the length of the yacht. Vance turned back to the room, his face pale, his breathing theatrical and ragged. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with a feigned yet terrifyingly convincing panic. "My heart," he gasped, his voice a strangled croak. "My medication, in the bathroom." He took a staggering step, his body swaying, before his legs gave out from under him. He collapsed to the floor in a heap, a convincing dead weight of expensive tailoring and sudden mortality. The sight of a billion-dollar asset apparently having a coronary was enough to shatter even a professional killer's composure. "Get him up!" Silas snarled at Bravo, his mind momentarily derailed from the mission to the immediate logistical nightmare of his primary target dying before he could open the vault. They rushed towards Vance's prone form, their focus narrowed to the man on the floor. It was the signal. In the engine room, Liam didn't hesitate. His hand closed around a massive insulated lever, the main power breaker for the entire vessel. With a grunt of exertion, he threw his entire body weight into it. The lever slammed down with a heavy, definitive thunk, and the world vanished. The hum of the backup generator, the glow of the computer consoles, the soft lighting in the corridors. Everything died. The Serenity was plunged into an absolute, suffocating darkness, a blackness so profound it felt like a physical substance. A second later, the emergency system kicked in. Thin strips of red light flickered to life along the baseboards, casting the opulent interiors in an eerie, demonic glow. The hunters were now in the dark, their technological advantages nullified, their environment suddenly alien and hostile. The sudden plunge into blackness and the eerie red glow that followed sent a fresh wave of panic through the ship. Over the comms, Liam could hear the hitmen's confusion turning to frantic anger. "They cut the power!" Silas's voice roared, no longer calm but ragged with fury. "Get the backup generator online! Bravo, report! Where are you?" But Liam was already moving. A predator perfectly adapted to the new environment. He had a small, powerful flashlight held between his teeth, its tight beam cutting a clean white line through the crimson gloom. He moved through the main lounge where the hostages were huddled, their whimpers and frightened sobs the only sound, besides the distant angry shouts of the hitmen. The operative who had been left to guard them was disoriented, spinning in a slow circle, his rifle held uncertainly, a dark silhouette against the red emergency lighting. Liam flowed towards him, a shadow detaching from other shadows. The hitman sensed movement at the last second, but it was too late. Liam's attack was a study in brutal efficiency. He didn't use the gun. He slammed the base of his flashlight into the man's temple, a sharp, jarring impact that sent a starburst of pain through the man's skull. As the hitman staggered, Liam swept his legs out from under him, bringing him down hard onto the deck. A single, precise chop to the back of the neck, and the man went limp, another piece removed from the board. The sound of the scuffle, muted as it was, caused a fresh surge of terror. From the upper deck, a panicked voice, likely the hitman who had been sweeping the area, yelled into the darkness. "I see movement." A muzzle flashed, a series of brilliant, blinding strobes that momentarily illuminated the lounge in stark, terrifying detail. The roar of automatic gunfire was deafening in the enclosed space. The hitman was firing blind, spraying bullets in the general direction of the hostages. Liam saw a woman on the floor, pulling her small child close. her body frozen in terror. He didn't think. He reacted. His promise to Maya, his core identity as a protector, took over. He launched himself across the floor, a human shield, tackling the woman and her daughter and covering them with his own body, just as a stream of bullets stitched a line of craters into the expensive wood paneling where they had been a second before. The impact of the slugs into the wall behind him was a series of dull, heavy thuds he felt through the floor. He heard the woman's sharp, terrified gasp beneath him. He pressed them lower, his voice a low, urgent command in her ear. "Stay down! Don't move!" He could feel the child trembling against his chest, and the feeling solidified his resolve into something as hard and unyielding as the ship's own hull. The immediate threat was neutralized. He left the woman and child in the relative safety of the floor and rose, a phantom in the red gloom. The objective was the bridge. He knew Silas would retreat there. It was the ship's nerve center, the only place from which he could hope to regain control. Liam fought his way up the grand staircase, its sweeping curve now a treacherous landscape of shadow and crimson light. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, the metallic tang of spent gunpowder. Halfway up, a figure emerged from the shadows near the top landing. It was Vance. The billionaire had used the chaos to his advantage. In his hand, he clutched a long, wickedly sharp letter opener, its silver handle gleaming in the red light. He held it like a dagger, his knuckles white, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked at Liam. At the grease-stained uniform and the cold professional focus in his eyes, and a look of dawning absolute certainty crossed his features. He nodded once, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. "Not exactly standard issue," Vance said, his voice a low rasp indicating the letter opener. "But it'll have to do. What's the plan, sailor?" The name hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the truth Vance had already pieced together. Liam didn't waste time with explanations. He just pointed up the stairs with the captured pistol. "They'll be on the bridge, 2 left. Silas and 1 other. We take them together." Vance's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. He gave a curt nod. The billionaire and the blue-collar worker, an unlikely alliance forged in chaos and blood, moved up the staircase as one, their ragged breathing mingling in the dark. They were no longer a tycoon and a mechanic. They were 2 men fighting for their lives, ascending into the final confrontation, ready to take back the ship. The bridge door was a slab of reinforced security glass and steel, designed to withstand a storm, not a siege. It was locked, impenetrable. Liam didn't even bother with the handle. His eyes scanned the corridor, landing on a heavy red fire extinguisher mounted on the opposite wall. He gave Vance a sharp, questioning look. The billionaire nodded, understanding instantly. He flattened himself against the bulkhead, gripping his silver letter opener like a trench knife. Ready. Liam ripped the extinguisher from its mount, the metal groaning in protest. He held it like a battering ram, the heavy cylinder a familiar, utilitarian weight. There was no finesse to this, only brute force. He swung it, putting his shoulders and back into the motion, and smashed it against the reinforced glass. The impact was a deafening, explosive crash that echoed through the ship, a sound of finality. The glass didn't shatter into pieces, it crazed, a spiderweb of 1,000 fractures spreading from the point of impact, but it held. He swung again and again, each blow a grunt of raw effort, until the compromised glass finally gave way, imploding inward in a shower of crystalline cubes. They burst through the opening into the crimson-lit chaos of the bridge. Silas and his last man, Bravo, were inside, frantically trying to reboot the ship's navigation systems. They spun around, weapons raised, their faces illuminated in the flashing red of the emergency alerts. "Looking for the navigation controls?" Vance's voice was surprisingly steady, laced with a cold corporate venom. He pointed his letter opener at the main console. "They're voice-activated, and you don't have the password." The bluff was perfect. A seed of doubt planted at the critical moment. Bravo hesitated, his eyes flicking to the console, and in that split second of distraction, Liam moved. He ignored Bravo, leaving him for Vance, and launched himself directly at Silas. The final confrontation was not a gunfight. It was a brutal personal ballet of violence amidst the flashing lights and shrieking alarms. Silas was fast, a skilled fighter who met Liam's charge with a spinning back kick that would have broken a normal man's ribs. But Liam wasn't a normal man. He absorbed the blow on his forearm, the impact a jarring shock, and used the momentum to close the distance, forcing them into the tight space between the captain's chair and the main console. "Who are you?" Silas snarled, his face a mask of fury and disbelief as he struggled to bring his rifle to bear in the close quarters. Liam didn't answer with words. He answered with a lifetime of training designed for exactly this environment, for fighting in the narrow, unforgiving confines of a naval vessel. He moved like water, using leverage instead of strength. He hooked Silas's leg, unbalancing him, and slammed him back against the console, the impact causing a shower of sparks. He drove an elbow into Silas's side, then used the man's own weapon as a lever, twisting it in a way that forced his arm into an unnatural angle. Silas cried out in pain, his grip on the rifle faltering. Liam's movements were a blur of systematic destruction. He wasn't trying to kill him. He was dismantling him, piece by piece. With a final vicious twist, he dislocated Silas's shoulder. The pop was sickeningly audible even over the alarms. The rifle clattered to the floor. Silas crumpled, his face ashen with agony, his fighting spirit extinguished. Liam stood over him, his chest heaving, the adrenaline of the fight coursing through him. He looked down at the defeated hitman, the architect of the night's terror. "Just a father," Liam said, his voice a low, ragged whisper, trying to get home for his daughter's birthday. He then spotted the comms unit on the floor. He picked it up, his thumb pressing the transmit button. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, clear, and carried the absolute, unquestionable weight of command. "This is the maintenance man. To anyone listening, the threat is neutralized. Stand down." As the first pale fingers of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the world returned to a semblance of order. The rhythmic thrum of rotors announced the arrival of the French Coast Guard, their cutters slicing through the calm morning sea towards the wounded yacht. The Serenity was a mess. The opulent lounge was a disaster zone of shattered glass, overturned furniture, and the dark, spreading stains of spilled wine that looked disturbingly like blood. The decks were slick with sprinkler water, and the air was thick with the lingering acrid smell of cordite. Shaken but safe, the guests were huddled in blankets on the sun deck, their earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet, hollow-eyed shock. The captured hitmen, bound and grim, were led away by armed officers, their reign of terror over. The ship was secure, but its illusion of untouchable perfection had been shattered forever. In his now wrecked study, Alistair Vance poured 2 glasses of 25-year-old single malt whiskey. The bottle was one of the few things in the room that had survived unscathed. He handed a heavy crystal tumbler to Liam, who stood by the shattered globe, still in his dirty, torn maintenance uniform. The grease stains and rips seemed like medals of honor in the quiet aftermath. Vance swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the clinking of the ice the only sound for a long moment. He looked at Liam, his gaze direct, all traces of his former arrogance gone, replaced by a deep, searching curiosity and a profound, undeniable respect. "That knot you used on the second man," Vance began, his voice low and measured. "The constrictor knot. I've only seen it once before. An old admiral taught it to me." He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "The way you used the ship's own systems against them. The way you cleared the lower decks without a fight. The way you moved in the dark." He paused, his eyes locking onto Liam's. "That wasn't a mechanic. That was a ghost. A professional. So I'll ask again. Who are you?" Liam stared into his glass, watching the light refract through the expensive crystal. He had spent years building a wall between his past and his present, a wall that had crumbled to dust in a single night. There was no point in hiding anymore. He took a long, slow breath and finally let the truth surface. "I was a senior chief in the SEALs," he said, his voice quiet, heavy with the weight of 100 forgotten battles. "I led a team for 15 years. I saw enough fighting for 10 lifetimes, in places you've only seen on the news." He looked up, his eyes meeting Vance's, and for the first time, the billionaire saw the deep soul-deep weariness behind the warrior's mask. "When my wife passed, she made me promise, no more war, no more disappearing for months on end, just a normal life for our daughter Maya." He swirled the whiskey, the memories rising with the fumes. "The only thing that mattered was giving her a stable home, a father who was there for her school plays and birthdays. So I was done. I promised her, and I promised myself. I just wanted to fix engines and be a dad. The job paid the bills. It was quiet. It was supposed to be safe." Vance listened, his expression unreadable. He finished his whiskey in one smooth motion and set the glass down with a soft click. He walked over to his desk, which was scarred by a stray bullet, and leaned against it. "I have corporate rivals, Liam. Sharks who would do this, and worse, to gain an edge. I've spent a fortune on security, on men with guns and impressive resumes. None of them could have done what you did tonight. You didn't just fight them, you out-thought them. You used their own tactics, their own assumptions against them. You used my own ship as a weapon." He pushed himself off the desk and walked back towards Liam, his eyes alight with a new, powerful idea. "I need someone I can trust, someone who knows how to handle the sharks, not just the ones who come with guns, but the ones in the boardroom too. I need a ghost of my own." He stopped directly in front of Liam. "I want you to be my head of global corporate security. It's not a field position. You'd be based out of the main office, a consultant, a strategist. You'd design the systems, you'd vet the personnel, you'd be the man who sees the threats before they ever reach the door." The offer hung in the air, stunning in its scope. The pay would be astronomical, enough to give Maya anything she could ever want: a trust fund, the best schools, a life of absolute security. "You kept my world safe tonight, Liam. Let me help you secure yours." A new dawn was breaking over the Mediterranean, the sun a brilliant cleansing fire on the horizon. Liam stood on the deck of the yacht, the cool morning breeze a welcome balm on his bruised face. He held his phone to his ear. The sound of his daughter's sleepy voice a melody that healed all wounds. "Hey, sweet pea," he said, a genuine, unburdened smile spreading across his face. "Guess what? I'm coming home." He could hear her excited gasp on the other end of the line. "Today?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "Today," he confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. "I'll be there in time to tuck you in tonight, I promise." He ended the call and took a deep breath of the clean, salt-tinged air. He looked out at the sunrise, at the endless expanse of the sea, a world that had once been his battlefield, and was now just a beautiful, peaceful horizon. The warrior and the father, the two halves of his soul that had been at war for so long, had finally found their peace. He was no longer just a ghost hiding in the machine. He was a father, a protector, and he was finally, truly on his way home.